Hi, I'm Wendy Turner, Executive Director of Michigan Public. You might have heard that public media is under threat. You're not wrong. But I come to tell you that your voice has power. Visit protectmypublicmedia.org, contact your lawmakers, and take a stand today.
Hi, Rick Pluta.
Hi, Zoe Clark.
So it is the day after the election, and we are bringing you a special It's Just Politics feed into your podcast feed today. We actually just finished talking with April Baer.
And a special It's Just Politics segment on Stateside.
Exactly. So we dug into where things stand right now in the U.S. Senate race. We dug into the toss-up races for Congress, the Michigan Supreme Court races, which is really a kind of the one bright spot for Michigan Democrats, as well as what is going to happen with divided government in Lansing. So take a listen, and then we are going to be back into your feeds throughout the week with updates on all things election 2024. Let's get going now.
It is so funny how we thought most of our election questions would get their answers early on Tuesday night. True enough, Michigan had a nice, quiet day of in-person voting, and absentee tabulation was very low drama. You love to see it. I don't think any of us will take that for granted ever again. But the election results themselves? Voters came to some very different conclusions up and down the ballot. Of course, the big story here is Donald Trump's win in Michigan. But our evolving understanding of the U.S. Senate race, a bunch of important U.S. House seats in Michigan, and a handful of statewide and legislative contests all had extremely different outcomes. Today, we're doing a post-election mop-up with Michigan Public's It's Just Politics team. Zoe Clark is Michigan Public's political director. Rick Pluta covers politics for the Michigan Public Radio Network. Hey, you two.
Hello.
Hi, April.
So that happened.
This happened.
We said this election was going to be all about small constituencies. That was borne out, yes?
Yes. I mean, right, when you're particularly talking about the Democratic Party, right? Like we just kept talking about suburban white women. We kept talking about the Arab American vote. We talked about the Latino vote. But what we found is in most of these communities, actually, is that Donald Trump here in Michigan expanded that electorate more than he did in 16 or 20 to some extent.
Yeah. Can you update us on where things stand as we're having this conversation with the U.S. Senate race between Mike Rogers and Alyssa Slotkin?
Right. So we should note that we are taping Wednesday early afternoon. We are expecting actually to hear from Congresswoman Slotkin at some point this afternoon. Right now, it is too close to call. The Associated Press has not called this race. They have called it for Donald Trump just within the past few hours. But Alyssa Slotkin right now, by some thousands of votes, appears to be up. But there are still overseas ballots that need to come in. And so that's likely what we will hear from her and possibly from the Rogers campaign later in the day.
When I was watching the debates for this race, I was so struck. Here are two candidates, both with congressional experience. Alyssa Slotkin is an incumbent in the House right now, and Mike Rogers was in the House in an earlier Congress. So there's some symmetry there, even though they both come from very different places politically. Rick, do you think this was an election about issues or about persona or just about the bigger feelings that voters had at the top of the ticket trickling down?
A little bit of all of that. As we pointed out up and down the ticket, it's almost like there are no small things to consider in this race. But it does seem like in the end, Alyssa Slotkin maybe presented herself as the more serious senatorial candidate, where Mike Rogers sort of ran more, tried to run on more of a, folksy personal connection.
I understand your problems kind of guy. Yeah.
And I mean, we also need to note that Mike Rogers in November of 2020 came out against Donald Trump. right, wrote an op-ed about Donald Trump's behavior, saying it was not appropriate behavior, and then changed his tune. He got through a Republican primary, likely because of changing his tune, likely because he got that support from Donald Trump, and really was with the president, if not during all of most of the times that the former president, Donald Trump, now President-elect Trump, came to Michigan. Rogers was campaigning with him. But in the end, it looks like that might just not have been enough. And as we've talked a lot about in It's Just Politics, this idea of ticket splitting might be back to some extent here in Michigan. But again, we've got to read more into the numbers and again, wait until this race is called.
And see who, people, depending on where they live, where they voted, those kinds of crosstabs that you look at. And also just in the, that column of there were no small things that, Alyssa Slotkin has been representing a pretty substantial chunk of Michigan in Congress recently, where Mike Rogers has not been in Congress or been a resident of Michigan for quite some time. And so there was a large chunk of Michigan that was already familiar with Alyssa Slotkin, who maybe didn't have strong memories of Mike Rogers.
We definitely need to talk about several congressional races, including the seat that Alyssa Slotkin currently occupies. We have had two close toss-up congressional seats called pretty recently in Michigan's 7th and 8th districts. Let us start in the 7th. Again, this is where Slotkin has been. Former Republican State Senator Tom Barrett has beat former Democratic State Senator Curtis Hertel. What do you guys know about what happened in this race?
Well, I think part of it is that just Tom Barrett was not going to be outworked, and
this is his I want to say his third run of this type in recent years.
This is his second run, and he lost to Slotkin 2 years ago by just some 20,000 votes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In the 8th congressional district, current Democratic State Senator Kristen McDonald-Rivet beat Republican businessman Paul Young, another person who's run several times.
This one is just fascinating to me. So I moderated a debate between these two candidates a couple weeks ago, and it was a fierce debate. And I'm talking about the audience. They were vocal. It was clear where the sort of young Trump supporters were. It was very clear where the McDonald-Rivet Harris supporters were in the audience. And what we have to note is, this district is part of Saginaw County. Saginaw County is a swing county within a swing state. So Donald Trump won the county in 2016 by 1,000 votes. Joe Biden won the entire county by some 300 votes, the entire county 4 years ago. Donald Trump, it appears, has won Saginaw County again, but Kristen McDonald-Rivet, the Democrat, has won this congressional seat. So this says to me that this was about a down ballot race, that McDonald-Rivet did the hard work, had the name recognition. And I'm wondering, again, that this is businessman Paul Young. This is actually his third time running for a congressional district, has moved around. She hit him a lot on that in the debate. And I'm just wondering if there just wasn't also enough of the sort of Donald Trump vibes to push him against the election. And again, if maybe there was some ticket splitting there. But again, these are all things that we want to dig into to try to better understand.
I probably should mention that 8th district House seat that McDonald-Rivet just won, this is the seat that Dan Kildee is vacating. He is retiring.
Both of these, we should note, are open seats, right? Because Alyssa Slotkin was moving from the 7th, Dan Kildee retiring. And so two open seats that, will help to determine the makeup of the U.S. House.
Well, which brings me to my next question. Redistricting in Michigan isn't that far in the rearview mirror. Alyssa Slotkin was running in a very different district the last time she won. Dan Kildee had to face a very different election map on this last time that he ran successfully for a U.S. House. Okay. So now the redistricting is done. Do you two foresee these two districts settling in, or do you think these will continue to be competitive House races in the years to come?
Well, for as long as there are incumbents in there, then the incumbents will have the natural advantage. But obviously, redistricting did succeed in one of its stated goals, which is making more competitive districts. And so none of these are, I mean, these incumbents, these new incumbents or people who are about to be new incumbents, know that they can't take these districts for granted.
The other thing, and I want to be really careful to already start about talking about 26,
right?
Because folks can't even process 2024 yet. But we also don't know what kind of political environment that we're going to be in. And let's remember 2 years ago, just the complete Democratic wave that we saw in the state of Michigan, where the entire state House, the entire state Senate, Governor Gretchen Whitmer was reelected. And so we certainly don't know what could portend in 2 years for these two races. But to Rick's point, I mean, incumbency is a hell of a drug.
One of the few bright spots for the Democratic Party last night, just out of the gate, the Michigan State Supreme Court races were called relatively early. I feel like we waited so long to find out some of these races. But by golly, Kyra Harris Bolden, a current Michigan Supreme Court justice, and a law professor, Kimberly Ann Thomas, both of them endorsed in the primary by the Democratic Party. They both won the races. What does this mean for the court, Rick?
Well, for one thing, I think it means that the sole remaining truly Republican justice, nominated Republican Brian Zara, might find himself on the lonely end of a lot of decisions.
Wait a minute. He's the only Republican left on the state Supreme Court now?
Well, it depends on where you put Chief Justice Elizabeth Clement, because she was appointed by a Republican Governor Rick Snyder. She was nominated at a Republican convention and kind of aligned herself with the Democratic portion of the court. So this could have a pretty profound effect on a lot of decisions coming from the court in the future. Also, these terms aren't short, and that means that and people tend to vote for incumbents in these races. So Democrats have a pretty powerful majority on this court at the moment, and probably the most significant one that in my memory.
Another just fascinating outcome of this race when, again, we're talking about Donald Trump winning Michigan, but again, a real Democratic-nominated, majority-nominated court in the state. It's fascinating to see.
Just to complexify things even further, because I can't stop myself, the Michigan State House. Republicans last night appear to have won back the majority. Democrats had this golden period for about 2 years when the governor's office, the state Senate, and the state House of Representatives were all under Democratic control.
They still do for a few more weeks.
Right, just a few more weeks, but as of January, that's going to be over with. Zoe, what do you make of the shift in the state legislature?
Yeah, look, we knew it was going to be close, that the fact that it went Democratic in the first place 2 years ago surprised many, maybe surprised more folks, of course, too, that the state Senate did. We should remind folks that the state Senate was not up for election. That's not for another 2 years. But look, Republicans appear to have won the state House, and what we know is we're going to be back to a period of divided government here in Michigan. We should remember, of course, that was Governor Gretchen Whitmer's first term in office, though, right?
But that didn't go great for her.
Well, I mean, it depends on whether you're talking about 2019 or once COVID started. But what we saw was acrimony. What we saw was fights over the budget. And obviously, of course, eventually COVID orders. We're hopefully, I'm knocking on wood, not going to be in, a global pandemic again in these final 2 years. But having a Republican state House is absolutely going to change the trajectory of this governor's agenda and really the final 2 years of her legacy in office.
Also, just to bring some raw politics into it, this does also mean that in the last 2 years of her time in office, Gretchen Whitmer has a foil and a group to blame for things not getting done.
I know I'm at least going to need a couple more weeks to go over everything that happened with the legislative elections. There's a lot of reading to be done, but I wonder if either of you saw any new fronts opening up. In 2022, Democrats were able to flip some key places, some key districts in places like Traverse City, Battle Creek, Sterling Heights. Have either of you had time to see if our traditional battlegrounds were still the battlegrounds that made a difference yesterday. Zoe, let's do you first.
I
and
was
then
just
we'll
going to
hear
say,
from
you
Rick.
mentioned Traverse City. I think again, if we're talking about bright spots for Democrats, the Betsy Kofia seat is absolutely one. She will remain back in the state house. But again, when you talk to political analysts and folks who have watched redistricting, things can change. Obviously, they do in every election, but with folks moving and demographics changing and things like that. So while we're seeing some solidification of what these maps look like, depending on the name, depending on the kind of race that the candidates run and the doors that are knocked, dozens of votes can make or break some of these races, and thus, the makeup of an entire chamber in the state legislature.
Rick Pluta.
Well, Zoe kind of stole my point there. But it will be interesting to see as we head into this new term, where did, instead of maybe seeing net pickups, did we see there being sort of philosophical swaps, that maybe things got a little bit more progressive over here, but they'll be a little more conservative over here, and and vice versa. And again, just sort of that mosaic of a more competitive state in these legislative races.
Oh, interesting. We've been trying to do justice to the many things that happened on down ballot races, which sometimes are the ones that have the most effect on how Michiganders actually live. But Rick, I know you were in the field last night at the Democratic Watch Party. I don't know that anybody was expecting a blue revolution from Kamala Harris's candidacy on down. But did you pick up any takeaways on maybe what the party will be thinking about and working on once they get past everything that happened last night, including the Harris loss?
Well, I think there's going to be a period of mourning and crying in their beers. That even last night, people came to that event in Detroit knowing that this was going to be very close. I think what they were not expecting was the broad sweep of losses that that they suffered.
The national map?
No, well, the national map in part because people who are partisan Republicans and partisan Democrats is that their loyalties don't stop at the state line. But yeah, certainly Donald Trump winning, which he would have done with or without Michigan, but also winning Michigan as well, plus losing control of the state house. There was a lot to mourn there, and everybody knew it was possible. I still think that they didn't expect it.
I kind of wonder which way the Michigan Republican Party is headed now. Pete Hoekstra's leadership was described by some as like a return to responsibility and a little bit more of the traditional organization style. But it feels like there's still so many Republicans who, like Mike Rogers, have not always been okay with Donald Trump. And I just wonder if there's further realignment ahead for the GOP. Do either of you have thoughts?
Pete Hoekstra has a challenge ahead of him because, he did just help win a battleground state for Donald Trump and preside over some significant successes for Republicans. But now going forward, to your point, he's got to do the job of one of the most difficult jobs that a party chair has. And you could also ask Michigan Democratic Party Chair Lavora Barnes about that, which is stitching together the various coalitions that make up a successful political party. And so when he's going and talking to his more right-wing members, that he's got to say, look, this is how we win, this is how we get policies, this is how we reelect a president like Donald Trump. Are they going to listen?
Okay, Zoe back here in the studio with Rick Pluta. Hey, Rick.
Hello.
Okay, that was our conversation earlier Wednesday, November 6th, about election 2024 here in Michigan, a special It's Just Politics. A reminder, we will continue to be in your feeds with all things election 2024 and looking ahead, including what divided government is going to mean in Lansing for the state, right? And for you. So that is It's Just Politics for today. I am Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
Take good care.